It was a night like no other. The grand ballroom, lit with crystal chandeliers and draped in velvet curtains, buzzed with the hum of excited conversations. The world's elite were gathered for the most anticipated event of the year, a gala celebrating innovation and creativity, where business moguls, artists, and musicians shared the same stage. It was an evening of celebration, but something unexpected was about to happen. What happens when the world's most innovative mind faces ridicule from a musical genius? Elon Musk, the billionaire entrepreneur and CEO of Tesla, SpaceX, and Neuralink, had always been at the center of controversy, but this time, things were different. He wasn't in front of a boardroom of investors or reporters asking about his next big venture. No, this time he was in the presence of something he'd never encountered before, an entire room of musicians. And one of those musicians was about to throw him into the limelight in a way he hadn't prepared for. The guest of honor at the gala that night was Luca Devereux, a world-renowned pianist and composer. Known for his virtuosity and commanding presence on stage, Luca had a reputation for being a bit, well, full of himself. He had the talent to back it up, but his ego was larger than any concert hall he'd ever performed in. As the evening progressed, Luca took the stage to perform a stunning classical piece that had the audience in awe. But after the final notes faded, Luca's gaze shifted to Elon, who was seated at the edge of the crowd, sipping champagne and appearing slightly out of place in his usual casual attire. Luca, ever the provocateur, couldn't resist. "And here we have the great Elon Musk," Luca called out, his voice cutting through the applause. "The man who can launch rockets into space but can't even play a simple tune on the piano." The room fell silent for a moment. The playful jab could have been dismissed, but Luca's tone was filled with an air of superiority. Elon, known for his quick wit and calm demeanor, didn't flinch. But there was something about the way Luca had mocked him, not just as a businessman but as a person, that stung. Elon knew he wasn't a musician, but this was different. The audience's gaze turned from Luca to Elon, expecting him to respond. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Elon sat back in his chair, momentarily lost in thought. He wasn't the kind of person to back down from a challenge, especially not one this public. He could feel the weight of the room on him, waiting for him to make a move. His mind raced, what could he possibly do in response? He wasn't an artist like Luca, but he had something more powerful than musical talent. He had innovation. And maybe, just maybe, he could turn this situation into something even bigger than a simple challenge. Luca's challenge had been a harmless quip to most, but to Elon, it felt like a test. He had faced far greater challenges than this, building companies from scratch, pioneering space exploration, creating electric cars in a market that deemed them impractical. But this was different. This was about something intangible, creativity, artistry, and the perception of what it means to be innovative. As the evening wore on, Elon couldn't shake the feeling that something more was at play here. There was a tension in the air, a simmering promise of something monumental waiting to happen. He looked around at the people in the room, each one trying to outshine the other with their accomplishments and expertise. He was used to being the one in the spotlight, but tonight, he felt like an outsider, not because of his business accomplishments but because of something as simple as a piano. And then, it hit him. What if he could show the world that innovation wasn't just confined to technology? What if he could show them that even in the world of music, a field where he was a complete novice, there was room for something new, something that combined his world of technology and engineering with the artistry of music? The idea was bold, risky, and completely unplanned. But that was Elon Musk for you. He thrived in moments of uncertainty, when the rules weren't clear, and the path forward was foggy at best. Maybe this was the perfect opportunity to challenge not just Luca but the very idea of what it meant to create something beautiful. The more Elon thought about it, the more the idea began to form in his mind. He stood up, his gaze locking onto the piano at the center of the stage. The same piano Luca had just played so flawlessly, the same instrument that had just been the source of mockery. Without saying a word, Elon made his way toward the stage. The audience, sensing something was about to happen, hushed. Luca watched in silent amusement, his arms crossed, an arrogant smirk on his face. Well, Luca mused aloud, are we going to have a little jam session? I'm afraid it's not the kind of thing you can just wing. But please, go ahead. Elon didn't respond immediately. Instead, he walked up to the grand piano, staring at it for a long moment as if contemplating the weight of his decision. He'd never played piano in front of anyone before, and certainly not on a stage like this. But then again, he'd never faced a challenge quite like this, either. He sat down at the bench, took a deep breath, and let his fingers rest lightly on the keys. The room was so quiet, you could hear a pin drop. For a moment, Elon hesitated. But then, without thinking too much, his fingers began to move, slowly at first, as if the music itself was still unsure whether it wanted to come alive. And then, something happened. The melody wasn't like anything anyone expected. It wasn't a classical piece, nor was it anything traditional. It was a strange, beautiful blend of electronic sounds mixed with the acoustics of the piano, almost like the sound of a rocket launching in slow motion, blended with the elegance of a symphony. Elon was creating something unique, something that was entirely his own, a piece of music that reflected the very essence of who he was. The audience sat in stunned silence. Luca's smirk faded as he realized what was happening. This wasn't just someone trying to play the piano. This was Elon Musk, thinking outside the box, pushing the boundaries of what music could be. The music played on, and the room filled with a new kind of energy, one that combined the familiar with the unknown. And in that moment, Elon Musk didn't just respond to Luca's challenge. He had created something entirely new. The audience was captivated, Luca included, who was now leaning forward in his seat, his eyes wide with disbelief. This wasn't what he had expected. The man who built electric cars and rockets had just created something that not only defied the traditional rules of music but also challenged everything they knew about what it meant to be creative. Elon didn't just play the piano. He silenced the world. Elon Musk wasn't always the billionaire tech mogul everyone knew him as today. His journey had started far from the glitzy ballrooms of galas and the headlines of technological breakthroughs. Instead, it began in the quiet streets of Pretoria, South Africa, where he was born on June 28, 1971. As a child, he was a curious and introspective boy, more interested in reading than playing with other kids. Books were his escape, and from a very young age, he was obsessed with science fiction, technology, and the idea of space exploration. He spent hours devouring books on everything from physics to engineering, trying to understand how things worked and how he could create things that didn't exist yet. Despite his brilliant mind, Elon faced challenges growing up. His parents divorced when he was young, and he was often bullied at school for being different. He was the quiet, awkward kid who preferred to bury himself in his books rather than hang out with the other children. In fact, there was one particular memory that stuck with him, an incident that had haunted him for years. Elon had been walking home from school when a group of older boys began mocking him. They pushed him around and called him names, and one of them even threw him down a flight of stairs. He didn't fight back. Instead, he picked himself up, brushed off the dirt, and walked home, nursing his bruises both physically and emotionally. It was in moments like this that Elon began to learn a powerful lesson: the world would often try to put you down, but how you responded mattered more than anything else. While this period was tough for him, it also shaped Elon's personality. He became more determined than ever to succeed, not just to prove the bullies wrong, but to show the world that being different wasn't a weakness, it was his strength. He found solace in the world of technology, becoming fascinated with the concept of innovation. At the age of 12, Elon taught himself to code and created his own video game called Blaster, a space-themed shooter game. He sold the game to a computer magazine for $500, a small sum but a massive accomplishment for a young boy with big dreams. Elon's love for technology continued to grow as he moved to Canada to attend Queen's University at the age of 17. His decision to leave South Africa was motivated by a desire for a better future, free from the constraints of his home country's socio-political environment. He eventually transferred to the University of Pennsylvania, where he pursued 2 degrees, one in economics at the Wharton School and another in physics at the College of Arts and Sciences. Even then, his mind was already brimming with ambitious ideas, many of which he would go on to turn into the world-changing ventures that would define his life. But it wasn't just his academic journey that made Elon the man he would become. It was the risks he was willing to take. After graduation, Elon moved to California to attend Stanford for a PhD in applied physics, but he dropped out after just 2 days. It wasn't a rejection of education, far from it. Rather, it was a realization that the future he envisioned wasn't going to be created inside a classroom. The tech boom was happening, and Elon knew that if he didn't act fast, he would miss out on the opportunity to make a real impact. So, in the mid-1990s, Elon dove headfirst into the world of entrepreneurship, founding Zip2, a company that provided online business directories and maps for newspapers. After selling it for nearly $300 million, he launched X.com, an online payment company that would eventually become PayPal. PayPal's success brought Elon his first major fortune, but it was only the beginning. Elon had his eyes set on far grander goals, goals that would reshape the world as we know it. One of those goals was to make humanity a multiplanetary species. SpaceX, his aerospace company, was born out of a deep desire to make space travel more affordable and accessible. Against all odds, SpaceX succeeded in launching reusable rockets and making space exploration a reality for the next generation. Elon's vision didn't stop there. Tesla was his dream of bringing electric cars to the mainstream, a bold idea in a world dominated by fossil fuels. Critics said it couldn't be done. Electric cars were too impractical, too expensive. But Elon proved them wrong by pushing the boundaries of what was possible, and Tesla became a symbol of sustainable innovation. He didn't stop at just building electric cars, though. He created an entire ecosystem around them, from solar energy solutions to autonomous driving technology. And then there was Neuralink, his venture to merge the human brain with computers, and the Boring Company, his idea to solve urban traffic problems by building underground tunnels. With each venture, Elon Musk proved that he wasn't just a businessman, he was a visionary, someone who saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. But despite his incredible success, Elon had often been misunderstood. His ventures were unconventional, and his personality, quirky, sometimes abrasive, wasn't always easy for the public to digest. People loved to praise his achievements but were often quick to criticize his failures. Despite his boldness, there was always an undercurrent of doubt, a feeling that his ideas were too ambitious, too far ahead of their time. That's where the gala came in. Elon was used to facing criticism, but this time it came from a surprising source, Luca Devereux, the famous pianist, a man who, by all accounts, had built his own empire based on his artistry. What Luca didn't realize was that Elon had faced far worse ridicule in his life. His critics had been vocal, but he had always emerged victorious. This time, the ridicule was just another challenge to overcome, a test of not just his technical brilliance, but his ability to innovate in a space that wasn't his own. Luca Devereux, for all his musical genius, was just another person who underestimated Elon Musk. The pianist had mocked him, but what he didn't know was that Elon had a secret weapon, his relentless drive to push boundaries. And it wasn't just confined to space, cars, or even the groundbreaking technologies he developed. Elon was about to show the world that his innovation could reach into the world of music, a domain where he had never expected to make his mark. The air in the ballroom was thick with anticipation. The soft, melodious notes of the piano had just echoed into the silence, and Elon Musk, the man who had revolutionized multiple industries, was now sitting at that same piano, poised to make his move. The crowd, once buzzing with casual conversation, was now entirely focused on the man who had just been publicly mocked by the world-renowned pianist, Luca Devereux. Luca had never imagined that Elon would accept his challenge, let alone take it to the next level. The tension was palpable, a surreal mixture of skepticism and curiosity hanging in the air. This wasn't a battle of business minds, or an intellectual debate, it was a confrontation between two worlds, two very different forms of genius. And it was unfolding in front of an audience who were waiting to see what would happen next. Luca Devereux, still seated with his arms crossed, watched Elon intently. His expression had shifted from smugness to something else, a mix of disbelief and perhaps a touch of respect, though he was careful not to show it. Luca had built his career on precision, on understanding the subtleties of the music world, and now, he was watching as a man who couldn't even play the piano had the audacity to turn the very art form he had mastered on its head. For Elon, this was more than just a performance, it was a challenge to his very identity. He was used to being underestimated, whether it was in the boardrooms or at SpaceX, where people thought his plans to launch reusable rockets were impossible. But this was different. The world had always seen him as the man who could take on the impossible, electric cars, space travel, artificial intelligence, but could he do something truly creative in a field where he had no expertise? Could he prove that innovation wasn't just about technology, but about the courage to step into unknown territories and break the rules? He didn't have to be a classical pianist to understand the dynamics of creativity. He understood that creativity wasn't just limited to one area, it was about combining seemingly unrelated ideas, blending them into something new. And so, as he sat at the piano, Elon felt an odd sense of calm. His fingers hovered over the keys, and he was no longer thinking about what Luca had said, or the weight of the crowd's gaze. He was simply thinking about the music, and about how he could make something new, something that would silence the mocking laughter and prove to the world that innovation had no boundaries. The first few notes were tentative, hesitant even. But as he played, Elon found his rhythm. What started as a cautious attempt grew bolder, more confident. The melody was something unique, something that blended the organic sound of the piano with a futuristic undertone, like the hum of a spaceship ready for takeoff. It wasn't just a simple tune, it was a reflection of who Elon Musk was, unconventional, bold, and driven by an unyielding desire to push the limits of what was possible. Luca's skepticism was beginning to fade as the music began to take shape. The audience, too, was transfixed. They had expected a failure, a billionaire with no musical training stumbling through the keys. But instead, they were hearing something they hadn't anticipated. It wasn't perfect in the traditional sense, but it was raw, powerful, and undeniably creative. And yet, Luca couldn't help but feel a sense of irritation bubbling up inside him. He had spent his entire life perfecting his craft, adhering to the rules of classical music, and here was Elon, a man who had never touched a piano in public, creating something that was unlike anything Luca had ever heard. It wasn't supposed to be this way. Luca was the one who was supposed to be admired, respected. His talent was supposed to be the standard. How could Elon Musk, of all people, challenge him in this way? As Elon continued to play, Luca's irritation deepened. He leaned forward in his chair, his eyes narrowing. This wasn't just a musical experiment, it was a direct challenge to his place in the world. Luca had built a career as a perfectionist, a virtuoso who was praised for his mastery of the classical piano. Elon, in comparison, was a tech mogul, an outsider to this world, and yet, here he was, capturing the attention of the audience with his unconventional sound. What's more, the more Elon played, the more Luca could sense that the crowd was enjoying it. The rhythm, though unfamiliar, had a mesmerizing quality. There was something electric about it, a quality that echoed the very essence of Elon's world. Luca hated it. He hated how Elon was defying the very principles of music he had dedicated his life to. But Luca also knew this wasn't something he could ignore. His reputation was on the line. And if this strange experiment of Elon's gained traction, it would have consequences for him and the world he had so carefully curated. Finally, as Elon reached the climax of his impromptu piece, Luca could take it no longer. He stood up from his seat, a scowl on his face, and walked toward the stage. His steps were deliberate, his presence commanding attention. He didn't need to say a word for the room to know that something was about to happen. "Enough," Luca said, his voice loud and clear, cutting through the music and the murmurs of the audience. "What you're playing isn't music. It's just noise. You can't simply throw random sounds together and call it innovation. Music has rules, structure, discipline. What you're doing isn't art." Elon paused, his fingers still resting on the keys as Luca's words hung in the air. The crowd was silent, waiting for Elon's response. Luca's criticism wasn't just about music, it was about everything Elon stood for. It was a challenge to his very identity as an innovator. And that, more than anything, was what would ignite the fire within Elon. Without missing a beat, Elon looked up at Luca, his eyes sharp with determination. "Maybe it's not art to you," Elon said calmly. "But what if it's a new kind of music? What if the rules you've lived by are just outdated?" The tension in the room was thick, and for a moment, it seemed like the entire world had stopped. Luca was taken aback, momentarily speechless. He had expected a simple apology, a meek response. But instead, Elon had done what he always did, he had turned the tables. And in that moment, Luca realized that this wasn't just about music. It was about a clash of worlds, old versus new, tradition versus innovation. The crowd, sensing the shift, began to murmur, some in support of Elon, others still unsure of where they stood. But one thing was clear, Elon Musk had just made a statement. And it was one that would leave an impression long after the gala ended. The room buzzed with hushed whispers, the palpable tension hanging in the air as the confrontation between Elon Musk and Luca Devereaux unfolded. Luca stood there, still processing Elon's words, his jaw clenched as if trying to decide whether he would fight or simply walk away. Elon, on the other hand, remained seated at the piano, his fingers still gently resting on the keys, his mind racing through the possibilities of what was to come. The grand gala, which had initially been a celebration of music and culture, had now turned into something much larger, a clash of ideologies. Luca's world of tradition, precision, and established mastery was now in direct opposition to Elon's world of innovation, disruption, and boundless curiosity. What was happening in this ballroom wasn't just about music anymore, it was about two men representing two different visions of the future. Luca's eyes narrowed, and without a word, he turned and began to walk off the stage. But there was something in the way Elon had spoken, something in the defiance of his words, that made Luca hesitate. He didn't want to let this go. The pianist, known for his cool demeanor and his ability to stay in control, was beginning to feel something he hadn't in a long time, insecurity. Backstage, Luca paced, trying to calm his thoughts. His entire career had been built on precision, adherence to form. He was a master of the piano, revered around the world for his ability to perform classical pieces with impeccable technique. But Elon Musk's impromptu performance, a fusion of raw emotion, futuristic sounds, and an unconventional approach, had shattered everything Luca believed in. In his mind, music was sacred. It had a history, a tradition. A carefully crafted set of rules governed it. And yet, Elon had simply come in and bent those rules with such ease. Luca's frustration only deepened as he realized that he had no control over this situation. He couldn't fight Elon with the same tactics he had always relied on. The world of music, it seemed, was rapidly changing, and perhaps, just perhaps, Elon's approach was a part of that change. On the other side of the stage, Elon was already thinking ahead. He wasn't content with just silencing Luca in the moment, he wanted to show him and the world something more. He wanted to prove that innovation, no matter the field, required breaking the old molds. His thoughts wandered back to all the times he'd faced ridicule in his life. He'd been laughed at for his ideas about reusable rockets. People told him that electric cars would never take off. And yet, time and time again, he had proven them wrong. Now, he was facing a new challenge, this time in the world of music. But it wasn't just about proving Luca wrong. It was about showing the world that true innovation often requires breaking barriers, even in places where people thought they were firmly established. So, Elon took a deep breath, stood up from the piano, and walked off the stage, his mind focused on one goal, showing Luca, and everyone else, that the future was full of endless possibilities, no matter where those possibilities came from. Back in the audience, the murmurs continued. People were still talking about the clash between the tech mogul and the celebrated pianist. It was clear that this wasn't a typical performance or an ordinary gala. The event had turned into a spectacle, with everyone wondering what would happen next. Would Luca try to get the last word? Or would Elon's unconventional genius leave a lasting mark on the world of music? Elon knew he needed to push further. He wasn't about to back down. This wasn't just about showing off his abilities, this was about proving a point. He wanted to show that the future of music, like the future of space travel, was wide open for anyone willing to break from tradition. Elon's plan was simple: bring together technology and music in a way that had never been done before. In his mind, music wasn't just about notes played on a piano or sung from the stage. Music was a language, an emotional journey that transcended instruments and technique. With the right tools, the right technology, it could become something even more. A new type of music, created by the fusion of sound and technology. It would be bold, experimental, and immersive. He returned to his seat at the piano, but this time, he wasn't alone. Behind him, a team of engineers from one of his companies had begun setting up various devices and gadgets. They weren't just there to observe, they were there to help him push the boundaries of what music could be. A series of digital instruments, each one connected to a laptop and controlled by a series of sensors, was now set up behind him. Luca, who had stepped outside to clear his mind, turned and walked back to the stage. He had been debating with himself whether to just leave or take back the reins of control. But something about the way Elon was preparing made him pause. He could feel the air shift, something big was coming. Part of him wanted to laugh at how out of place Elon seemed in this world, but another part of him couldn't shake the curiosity that had begun to build inside him. Elon's fingers hovered over the piano keys, but this time, they didn't just play the instrument in front of him. The devices connected to the sensors began to hum, creating an eerie, otherworldly sound that blended with the piano. As Elon struck the first chord, the sound didn't just come from the piano, it emanated from the air around him. It was a futuristic symphony that combined the organic sound of the piano with digital effects that seemed to come from nowhere. The crowd fell silent, transfixed by what was happening. This wasn't just a man playing a song, this was something else entirely. The music was evolving before their very ears, twisting and turning in ways they had never imagined. The energy in the room shifted as the audience realized that they were witnessing something groundbreaking. Elon had done the unthinkable, he had merged technology and music in a way that felt fresh, exciting, and, dare they admit, revolutionary. Luca stood off to the side, watching in stunned silence. He had expected to hear a failed attempt at a musical piece, something awkward and disjointed. But instead, he was hearing something strange, something captivating. It wasn't perfect, not by the standards of classical music, but it was unlike anything he had ever heard. For the first time, Luca questioned his own beliefs. Was this truly innovation? Or had he, like so many others, been too stuck in the past to recognize that the future was already here? The music built, rising to a crescendo that filled the room with an almost tangible energy. The crowd's reaction was mixed, some were still in shock, while others were leaning forward, captivated by the new direction in which Elon was taking them. The line between what was considered music and technology was starting to blur, and they were all witnesses to the evolution of something completely new. Luca's gaze shifted to Elon, who was completely immersed in the sound, his eyes closed as his fingers danced over the keys. It was clear now that Elon had found something inside himself, a spark of creativity that transcended his previous endeavors in technology and business. And Luca knew, with a sickening realization, that this performance would change everything. There was no going back. The room was bathed in a surreal glow as the sounds from the stage crescendoed, reaching an intensity that felt almost physical. Every note Elon Musk played seemed to vibrate through the very walls of the ballroom, reverberating deep into the hearts of those in the audience. The atmosphere was electric. The music, a strange blend of organic piano chords and digital effects, had taken on a life of its own. It was a new kind of sound, something futuristic, yet deeply emotional. The fusion of technology and melody stirred something inside every person present. No one could deny that they were witnessing history. Luca Devereaux stood at the edge of the stage, his face pale and his hands clenched at his sides. He had not moved since Elon began playing again, his previous skepticism and arrogance melting away in the face of this unexpected brilliance. His mind raced, caught between admiration and frustration. Elon wasn't just playing music, he was creating a new world, one that Luca had never imagined possible. It was like witnessing the birth of a new form of art, and it was both exhilarating and terrifying. Luca had built his entire career on the premise that music was an art form rooted in centuries of tradition. It was about mastery, about following the rules that composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin had established. But what Elon was doing, what he had just done, was to toss those rules aside in favor of something new, something wild and unrestrained. It felt as though the very foundation of Luca's world was crumbling beneath him. A sudden rush of emotion swelled within Luca. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest as he tried to process what was happening. Was this music? Was this the future of music? Or was this just noise, something that might never be accepted by the purists who revered the works of masters like himself? As the final notes from Elon's performance hung in the air, the audience remained in stunned silence. The energy in the room was almost unbearable, as though everyone were holding their breath, unsure of what to say or do next. For several seconds, not a single sound could be heard. The gravity of the moment had settled in, and the crowd wasn't sure whether they should cheer or remain in awe. It was Luca who broke the silence. His voice, when it came, was low and shaken. I didn't expect this, he said, the words almost escaping him. But I can't deny it. This was something different. Elon stood from the piano, his hands still lingering on the keys as if unsure whether he should leave them or allow the music to fade completely. He turned to face Luca, the tension between them still palpable but now accompanied by something deeper, an understanding, perhaps. Elon's eyes were calm, focused. Maybe the world needs something different, he said, his voice steady. Maybe music, like everything else, needs to evolve. We're in the middle of a revolution, Luca, an age where boundaries are being redrawn every day. Why should music be any different? Luca opened his mouth to reply, but no words came. He had always believed that innovation in music should come from new interpretations, but this was something far beyond what he could have ever imagined. He had always prided himself on his mastery of the piano, but what Elon had done was something entirely alien to him. It was something raw, untamed, a declaration that the rules no longer applied. The crowd's response was a mix of hushed gasps, murmurs of disbelief, and tentative applause. No one seemed entirely sure how to react. The classical music lovers in the room were undoubtedly perplexed, while others, those from the tech world, from Silicon Valley and beyond, were undoubtedly awestruck by the sheer audacity and originality of Elon's performance. But it was more than just the performance. It was the way Elon had broken down the wall between technology and art. He had bridged the gap between the digital world and the human experience in a way no one had even dared to imagine. Elon had created a new kind of music, a new form of art, one that was born out of the union between technology and human emotion. I get it now, Luca muttered, almost to himself. His voice, though faint, reached Elon's ears. This isn't about perfection. It's about feeling. It's about expression. Elon looked at Luca, a small, knowing smile crossing his face. Exactly. It's about finding a way to express what we feel, what we all feel, no matter what tools we use. There was a long pause. The audience watched as Luca stepped forward, his posture still rigid, but his demeanor softer than it had been moments before. He slowly extended his hand to Elon, the weight of what had just transpired settling on him. The pianist, for all his technical skill and acclaim, realized that his world was changing, and perhaps it was time to embrace it. Elon took Luca's hand, and the two men shared a moment of quiet acknowledgement, an understanding that something profound had just occurred. It was no longer about one man proving himself better than the other, it was about realizing that their worlds, though vastly different, were not in opposition. Instead, they could be woven together in ways they had never imagined. The audience erupted into applause. It wasn't a loud, boisterous celebration, but rather a slow, building recognition of what had just taken place. The applause was hesitant at first, but then it grew, growing louder and more insistent as people began to realize the significance of what they had witnessed. It was a fusion of worlds, an awakening to the limitless potential that existed when creativity and technology collided. They were witnessing a shift in how music, art, in general, would be perceived in the future. As Elon and Luca stood together, side by side, at the center of the stage, the emotional weight of what had just transpired hung in the air. Luca, for all his pride, had come to understand that the future of art wasn't just about adhering to tradition. It was about embracing innovation, about breaking free from the constraints that held back creativity. And in that moment, Luca understood, this wasn't just a performance, it was the beginning of a new era. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't one of uncertainty. It was the silence of awe, of respect. And in that silence, something monumental had changed. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The gala had come to an end, but the ripples of the evening's events were far from over. As the last guests slowly trickled out of the ballroom, the air still buzzed with the energy of what had transpired. People whispered excitedly to each other, their faces flushed with a mix of disbelief and wonder. The performance, Elon's audacious fusion of technology and music, had shaken the very foundation of what they had known about art, about creativity, and about the future. Luca Devereux, once the towering figure of classical piano, stood quietly in a corner of the grand hall. His usual air of confidence had been replaced by a kind of introspection. The pride that had once defined his every step now felt strangely distant. He had been forced to confront his own limitations, to acknowledge that the world of music, the world he had spent his entire life mastering, was changing, and changing faster than he could have ever anticipated. He wasn't alone for long. Elon Musk, who had been swept up in the excitement of the evening, had come to find him. The tech mogul's usual charisma was tempered with an uncharacteristic softness. It was clear that the night had been a turning point for both of them, though in very different ways. Elon, Luca began, his voice hesitant at first, I've been thinking. I've spent my life building a career based on rules, on tradition. I thought that's what made music powerful. The fact that it followed a path laid out by those who came before. But you've shown me something completely different. Elon smiled, though his expression held a quiet humility. I don't know if it's that simple. It's not about rejecting tradition entirely. It's about expanding what's possible. It's about seeing that we don't have to be bound by the past to create something beautiful. Innovation doesn't erase the past, it builds on it. Luca took a deep breath, his gaze fixed on the floor for a moment. Then he looked up, meeting Elon's eyes with a new understanding. I think you're right. It's not about throwing away the old ways, but about finding new ways to express ourselves. I've been so focused on perfection, on doing things by the book. But maybe perfection doesn't always mean following the rules. Maybe it means capturing something raw, something real. Elon nodded, his face lighting up with a knowing smile. Exactly. It's about finding your voice. And sometimes, that voice comes from the most unexpected places. For a long moment, neither man said anything. It was as though they were both contemplating the enormity of the conversation that had just unfolded, not just about music, but about life itself. Luca had spent so much of his life striving for precision, for mastery over every note, every gesture. But in that quiet space between them, he understood that the mastery Elon spoke of was something different. It was a mastery of the unknown, a willingness to embrace the chaos and the unexpected. Finally, Luca broke the silence, his voice filled with a newfound clarity. I used to think that the best music came from perfect technique. But maybe the best music comes from something more. Maybe it comes from the soul. Elon's eyes softened, and he placed a hand on Luca's shoulder. I think you've just found the answer, Luca. Music, technology, business, it's all about finding the humanity in what we create. It's about putting ourselves into what we do, and not being afraid to break the mold. Luca smiled, a genuine, unguarded smile that hadn't appeared on his face in years. Thank you, Elon. I think you've just given me a new direction. A new way to think about not just music, but life. Elon chuckled softly. It's funny, isn't it? How sometimes the biggest breakthroughs come not from knowing more, but from letting go of what we think we know. The two men stood there for a while longer, the grand ballroom now empty except for the lingering echoes of their conversation. In that moment, both of them knew that something profound had changed, not just between them, but within them. For Luca, the evening had been a revelation. He had come to the gala expecting to showcase his mastery of a centuries-old tradition, only to find himself humbled by the creative audacity of a man who had never been bound by those same traditions. He had spent so many years focused on following a set path, a well-worn road that had been paved by the greats before him. But Elon had shown him that there was another way, a path of exploration, of pushing boundaries, of embracing the unknown. Elon, for his part, had been reminded of something he had often forgotten in the fast-paced world of tech and innovation. Creativity, in its purest form, didn't come from following formulas or breaking things down into logical components. It came from a willingness to experiment, to try, to fail, and then to try again. It came from tapping into something deep inside, something raw and unrefined, and letting that energy shape the world around you. As the night drew to a close, the two men walked out of the ballroom together, their conversation drifting into the cool night air. It was clear that they had both learned something vital. For Luca, it was a lesson in the power of change, of letting go of the need for control, and embracing the messy beauty of creativity. For Elon, it was a reminder that no matter how far technology advanced, it was still, at its heart, about the people who created it, and the stories they told. And in that quiet reflection, they both realized that the world of music, like the world of technology, like the world itself, was at a crossroads. What happened next was up to them. But one thing was certain, the future would be nothing like the past. The months that followed saw a quiet but profound shift in the worlds of both music and technology. Luca Devereux, once known for his strict adherence to classical technique, began exploring new sounds and genres, incorporating digital technology into his performances in ways that stunned his fans and critics alike. His music became a fusion of the old and the new, a testament to the power of evolution in art. Elon Musk, ever the innovator, continued pushing the boundaries of what was possible. But now, in his mind, the future wasn't just about building the next great tech marvel. It was about building a future where creativity, in all its forms, could flourish without restriction. Music, like space exploration or electric cars, was just another frontier waiting to be explored. Together, they had shown the world that sometimes, the most significant innovations came not from the breaking of rules, but from the willingness to expand them, to find new ways to express the human experience. As for the rest of the world, it would never look at music, or technology, the same way again. Elon Musk's journey was never a simple one. His life was a series of calculated risks, high-stakes ventures, and an unrelenting pursuit of innovation. Behind the headlines of SpaceX's rockets and Tesla's electric cars, there was a story of resilience, failure, and a vision that extended far beyond what the world could immediately comprehend. Elon's love for technology was not born from a simple fascination with gadgets or machines. It was a deep-seated belief that technology could change the world, that it was the key to solving humanity's greatest challenges. From the very beginning of his career, Elon was driven by a purpose much larger than profit. He saw technology as a tool for progress, a means of transforming how people lived, worked, and interacted with the world around them. But Elon's success didn't come without its challenges. His rise to prominence, while marked by extraordinary achievements, was also shaped by a series of crushing failures. Take, for example, his early days with Tesla. Despite his groundbreaking vision for electric cars, the company's early years were riddled with financial instability and operational struggles. In fact, Tesla was on the brink of collapse more than once. Investors doubted Elon's dream of creating a mass-market electric car, and critics questioned whether such a vehicle could ever compete with traditional gasoline-powered cars. In those early years, many thought Tesla was doomed to fail. The road was steep, the hurdles high, and the pressure mounting. But Elon, with his trademark stubbornness and belief in his vision, refused to give up. He invested millions of his own money to keep the company afloat, often putting his own financial security at risk. The world looked on, skeptical and doubtful, but Elon saw the bigger picture. He knew that Tesla was not just a car company, it was a symbol of what could be achieved through innovation and risk-taking. Similarly, Elon's journey with SpaceX had its fair share of setbacks. The company's early attempts to send rockets into space were disastrous. SpaceX's first 3 launches ended in failure, and many wondered if Elon's dreams of making space travel affordable and accessible to the masses were nothing more than a pipe dream. The media was quick to write off SpaceX as just another failed venture, and even some of his closest advisors questioned whether Elon's goals were too ambitious, too far-fetched. But Elon was relentless. Instead of conceding defeat, he used each failure as a lesson, a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal. With each unsuccessful launch, he learned more about the science of space travel, the engineering challenges, and the technologies that needed to be perfected. And with time, SpaceX eventually achieved what many thought was impossible. They became the first privately funded company to send a rocket to the International Space Station. Yet, even in the face of monumental success, Elon's career was never without challenges. There were the constant doubts about whether his ventures could ever be truly profitable, the scrutiny over his ambitious timelines, and the pressure from investors who wanted to see quick returns. And even after SpaceX successfully launched the Falcon Heavy and Tesla achieved profitability, Elon continued to face criticism, particularly from those who questioned whether his dreams were achievable in the long term. But what set Elon apart from others was his ability to push through those doubts and keep moving forward. His tenacity, vision, and belief in the transformative power of technology allowed him to transcend the inevitable setbacks. He was willing to sacrifice in order to achieve what many thought was impossible. In parallel with his work at Tesla and SpaceX, Elon was also building other ventures. Neuralink, a company dedicated to merging the human brain with artificial intelligence, and The Boring Company, which sought to revolutionize urban transportation. Through all of these endeavors, one thing remained constant: Elon's vision to build a future where technology was not just a tool but a solution to humanity's greatest challenges. Through his successes, failures, and relentless pursuit of his dreams, Elon had become a symbol of innovation and the future. And though his path was far from easy, his work laid the foundation for a technological revolution that would shape the next century. While Elon Musk was forging his own path through the technology sector, a different kind of journey was unfolding in the world of classical music. Luca Devereux, a virtuoso of the piano, had spent his life dedicating himself to the purity of sound, the tradition of the great composers, and the meticulous art of music. Yet, like Elon, Luca was at a crossroads. Facing the tension between preserving the past and embracing the future. Elon's work in technology had already begun to influence Luca's world in unexpected ways. The idea of merging technology with art was something that had been simmering in Luca's mind ever since that fateful night at the gala, where Elon's music had stunned the audience with its mix of futuristic sounds and raw emotion. In that moment, Luca realized that the future of music might not lie in strict adherence to tradition but rather in the uncharted territory where music and technology intersected. Luca was now grappling with this idea, torn between the traditional purity of his music and the exciting, albeit unknown, world that Elon had introduced him to. Could he, a staunch defender of classical music, evolve? Could he step into this new era of creative freedom where boundaries didn't exist, where art wasn't confined to the rules of the past? These questions were not easy to answer. Luca had spent years perfecting his craft, and the idea of breaking away from the established norms of classical music felt like a betrayal of everything he had worked for. But deep down, Luca knew that the world of music was shifting. Just as technology had evolved, so too must art. And if he wanted to remain relevant in this new age of innovation, he would have to evolve as well. Yet, the challenge was not just about technical skill. It was about philosophy. Luca found himself questioning his own values, wondering whether his fear of change had kept him from fully embracing his own creative potential. He had always been taught that music was about emotion, about connection, but what if that emotion could be captured and amplified through technology? In the end, it was clear that both Elon and Luca were facing similar struggles. They were both visionaries trying to break free from the constraints of tradition and push forward into a new, unknown future. They might have come from different worlds, one from the realm of technology, the other from the realm of classical music, but their shared pursuit of creativity, innovation, and pushing boundaries connected them in a way that would change their paths forever. And though the road ahead was uncertain for both of them, one thing was clear: they were both ready to confront the challenges that lay ahead, no matter how difficult or uncomfortable they might be. Luca Devereux had always known music was his calling. From the moment he had first placed his fingers on a piano as a young boy, something deep inside him had clicked, as if the very keys were an extension of his soul. He had spent his entire life mastering the piano, and through the years, his commitment to perfection had earned him a reputation as one of the finest classical pianists of his generation. Yet, despite the accolades, the standing ovations, and the adoration of his fans, Luca always felt a sense of emptiness within himself. There was a loneliness in his life that no amount of applause or praise could fill. Music, for him, had always been a deeply personal journey, one that was often isolated from the world. He had never truly understood how to connect with people outside of his performances, and the isolation that came with his fame only seemed to deepen the void. In his early years, Luca had believed that fame and recognition would bring him the fulfillment he sought. But as time went on, he realized that the applause of the audience was fleeting, and the satisfaction of a perfect performance was always just out of reach. It was as if the more he played, the more he was searching for something intangible, something that was not found in the sound of the keys, but in the relationships he lacked in his personal life. Music had always been his refuge, his sanctuary, but it had also kept him distant from others. The world of classical music was strict and unforgiving. The rules were etched in stone, passed down from generation to generation, and Luca had become a master of those rules. His playing was flawless, but it was mechanical. He could hit every note with precision, but the music often lacked the warmth and humanity that made it truly unforgettable. He had become trapped in the pursuit of perfection, to the point where he feared deviating from the script. Every note, every phrase, had to be executed just so. There was no room for error, no room for exploration or experimentation. But that all began to change the moment he met Elon Musk. Elon's unconventional approach to music had shaken Luca's world to its core. Luca had spent his entire life building his career on a foundation of discipline, mastery, and tradition. He had prided himself on his ability to play the great composers with an unmatched level of precision and emotion. Yet, Elon, with his fusion of technology and music, had shattered that world. The way Elon merged digital sounds with classical tones opened up a new realm of possibilities, one that Luca had never considered. For the first time in years, Luca felt a spark of excitement. It wasn't just the music that intrigued him, but the philosophy behind it. Elon had shown him that music didn't have to be bound by tradition. It could be something alive, something that evolved with time and technology. It didn't need to be confined to the strict guidelines of the past. It could be fluid, constantly changing, and infinitely creative. But embracing this new way of thinking was not easy for Luca. The classical world he inhabited had been built on a foundation of rigor, where the past was revered and the future was viewed with skepticism. Any deviation from the norms was often seen as heresy. And Luca had been one of its most ardent defenders. He had spent years fighting to preserve the sanctity of classical music, believing that the past held the answers to every question. Yet, now, standing on the precipice of this new frontier, Luca found himself torn between two worlds. The world he had built, filled with tradition and discipline, had given him purpose and recognition. But the world Elon had shown him was filled with possibility, an endless horizon where the boundaries between art and technology could blur, where music could be more than just a performance, it could be a conversation between the past and the future. Luca spent long nights wrestling with these thoughts. He would return to his piano, playing the same pieces he had performed 1,000 times before, but now they felt different. He could hear the notes, but he also heard the gaps, the places where something new, something fresh, could emerge. The thought of combining technology with music, of creating something that felt new and alive, excited him in ways he hadn't felt in years. But it also frightened him. It was one thing to experiment with new sounds in the comfort of his own studio, but it was another thing entirely to step out into the world and challenge the very foundations of classical music. Luca's reputation as a perfectionist was built on the notion that classical music was sacred, that it could never be altered. How could he, a man who had spent his life perfecting the old ways, now embrace the unknown? As Luca pondered these questions, he also confronted a deeper, more personal conflict. For years, he had sacrificed his personal life for his music. He had pushed away friends, family, and potential romantic relationships in favor of his practice and performances. His intense dedication to his craft had alienated him from the things that might have brought him happiness. Things that Elon seemed to effortlessly juggle in his own life, despite his demanding career. Elon was a man of vision, of bold ideas, and he seemed to understand that life was about more than just work. For Luca, this was a foreign concept. He had always been taught that mastery came from sacrifice, and he had spent years building a life that revolved around nothing but his music. But now, as he reflected on his encounters with Elon and the world outside of music, he began to wonder if there was more to life than simply being the best pianist. Luca realized that, just as he had once looked to the past for answers, perhaps it was time to look forward. The future of music, just like the future of technology, lay in the unknown. It wasn't about discarding tradition, but about finding new ways to connect, to create, and to live. It wasn't about perfecting the old ways, it was about integrating them with the new. Music could be both a reflection of the past and an expression of the future, and Luca was ready to explore that possibility. As he sat at his piano, the keys seemed to beckon him in a way they never had before. He wasn't just playing the notes anymore. He was hearing the spaces between them, the moments where something new could emerge. It was time to let go of his fear, to stop worrying about perfection, and to embrace the chaos of creativity. With a deep breath, Luca began to play, this time, not just with his fingers, but with his heart and his mind wide open. The Grand Concert Hall in New York City buzzed with anticipation. The lights were dimmed, and the atmosphere was charged with excitement as the audience filled the seats, eagerly awaiting the night's performance. It was an event unlike any other, one that promised to blur the boundaries between the worlds of technology and classical music. Tonight, Luca Devereux, the virtuoso pianist, would face off against Elon Musk, the technological visionary who had so deeply influenced the future of music. For weeks, the world had speculated about the outcome of this unusual encounter. What would happen when one of the world's greatest classical musicians met one of the most innovative tech entrepreneurs? Would they clash or find a new way to collaborate? As the lights dimmed completely, a spotlight shone down on the center of the stage. Luca stood there, his black tuxedo crisp, his expression focused. His fingers hovered over the keys of a grand piano. To the untrained eye, it appeared to be an ordinary performance. But to Luca, every note he played was a step into a battle, an internal war between his years of training and the uncharted territory that Elon represented. His fingers moved with grace, but behind his calm exterior, there was a storm brewing within him. Could he truly embrace this new age of music that Elon had introduced to him? Luca took a deep breath and began to play a classical piece, one of his favorites, Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. It was a piece that had been in his repertoire for decades, one he could perform without thinking. As the first notes reverberated throughout the hall, he felt the familiar calm that came with his mastery. This was his world, a place where every note had a purpose, every phrase had a meaning, and every audience member had an expectation. But then, just as Luca reached the second movement, a new sound rippled through the air. It wasn't a mistake or a flubbed note, it was something else. A digital hum, followed by a deep, resonating tone, filled the space. The audience shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what they were hearing. From the far side of the stage, a large screen flickered to life. Elon Musk stood at a console, his fingers dancing over a touchpad. He smiled at the crowd, his usual air of confidence now tempered with a hint of challenge. The lights dimmed even further, leaving only the illuminated screen and Luca's piano as the focal points of the performance. Luca paused, his hands still hovering over the piano keys. The sudden intrusion had thrown him off guard. This wasn't how he had imagined the evening going. He had come to play a concert, to showcase the beauty and complexity of classical music. Yet here was Elon, with his technology, trying to fuse an entirely new form of music into the mix. Ladies and gentlemen, Elon's voice echoed across the hall, tonight, we embark on a new frontier. We'll see if art can truly live at the intersection of technology and tradition. Luca's jaw tightened, his thoughts racing. He had no intention of allowing technology to overtake his music. The traditions of classical music were sacred to him. They had been the foundation of his life, and no matter how advanced technology had become, they were not to be trampled upon. Let's see if we can find new dimensions to sound, Elon continued, his eyes never leaving the console as his fingers worked their magic. From the speakers, a series of futuristic digital tones began to weave into the space, gradually merging with the notes Luca had been playing. For a moment it was an odd amalgamation of sounds. Luca's piano music, precise and controlled, clashed against Elon's digital sounds, erratic and unpredictable. It was as though two worlds were fighting for dominance, and neither one was willing to yield. Luca's fingers moved again, trying to reclaim the melody, but each time he played, Elon's technology would shift and alter the sound. What started as a harmonious piece slowly descended into chaos as the two creative forces battled it out on the stage. The audience was spellbound, unsure whether they were witnessing a new era of music or the unraveling of something sacred. Then came the turning point. In the middle of the growing tension between the two forces, Luca paused once more, his fingers still on the piano. The sounds were no longer working in tandem, they were competing. The music felt like a war, with each note fighting to be heard above the other. He felt frustrated, his heart racing as he tried desperately to maintain control. "Stop," Luca said, his voice cutting through the cacophony of sound. He took a deep breath, his eyes locking with Elon's. "This is not music. This is chaos." For a moment, the hall was silent, save for the subtle hum of Elon's digital creations in the background. The audience waited with bated breath, unsure of what would come next. Would Luca step back, conceding to Elon's experiment? Or would he fight to preserve what he believed was the soul of music? Elon stepped forward, his gaze unshaken. "Music is not about perfection, Luca. It's about breaking boundaries. It's about exploring new ways to express emotion." Luca's hands dropped to his sides, the frustration visible on his face. But tradition, discipline, those are what give music its power. You can't just. "You're right, Luca," Elon interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "But what if we didn't have to choose? What if the future of music is not about opposing technology or tradition but about blending them? What if we could harness both to create something entirely new? The words hit Luca like a tidal wave. He hadn't considered it that way. He had thought of technology as an intrusion, something that didn't belong in the world of music. But what if Elon was right? What if there was a way to use technology not to replace the old but to enhance it, to take it further than it had ever gone before? Elon's eyes softened, and for a brief moment, there was no tension between them, only a shared understanding. Let's try again, Elon suggested, his tone more inviting now. But this time, we'll create something together. Luca hesitated. It would be a risk, and it would challenge everything he had ever known about music. But something inside him stirred, a spark of curiosity, a desire to grow. Slowly, Luca nodded. He returned his hands to the piano, and this time, instead of resisting Elon's technology, he embraced it. As his fingers pressed down on the keys, Elon's sounds merged with his own, creating a symphony of tradition and innovation. The music they created together was unlike anything the world had ever heard before, a perfect harmony of past and future. It was no longer a battle. It was a collaboration. And as the final notes echoed through the hall, the audience erupted into applause, not just for the performance but for the new possibilities that had been revealed. Luca and Elon stood side by side, their eyes meeting in mutual respect. The confrontation had led to something far greater than either of them could have imagined. As the applause faded into the ether of the concert hall, Luca and Elon stood together, their eyes not just meeting but locking in a shared understanding. It was as if both of them had unlocked a door to a world they hadn't even realized existed before, and now they were both standing in its threshold, unsure of what to do next. The blending of Luca's classical piano with Elon's cutting-edge technology had created something entirely new, an exhilarating, unpredictable fusion of tradition and innovation. The audience's response had been overwhelming, and the energy in the room was electric. Yet, despite the standing ovation, Luca still felt a nagging sense of disbelief. Could they truly change the way music was perceived? Could this truly be the beginning of something monumental? Elon, ever the visionary, had a confident smile on his face. His eyes gleamed with excitement, not from the recognition of his work but from the endless possibilities that had just been unlocked. He could see it, this wasn't just about music, it was about challenging every boundary that had ever existed, about pushing the very limits of what art, technology, and creativity could do together. I told you, Elon said softly, glancing at Luca. There's no limit to what we can do when we let go of the past, when we stop trying to fit everything into neat boxes and start combining the best of everything. Luca, for the first time in a long while, wasn't sure how to respond. His mind was still whirling. He had always believed that music was sacred, that it was something that had to be respected and preserved. But now, standing next to Elon, he realized how much of that belief was rooted in fear, the fear of the unknown, the fear of venturing beyond what he had always known to be true. Elon, Luca began slowly, still processing the whirlwind of emotions that had hit him. I didn't realize that music could be more than just a reflection of the past. I've always been so focused on preserving it, but what you've shown me today, it's not about replacing tradition, it's about expanding it. Elon's smile widened. Exactly. We're not here to replace anything, Luca. We're here to create something new, a bridge between the old and the new. A synthesis of ideas. The future of music isn't defined by technology or by tradition alone. It's defined by the willingness to break boundaries, to explore the edges of what's possible. For the first time, Luca didn't feel as if he was fighting for something. He wasn't fighting to protect a way of life, a set of rules. Instead, he was ready to create something that didn't need protection, it needed exploration. A sense of freedom washed over him, a sense that the very thing he had dedicated his life to could be part of something far greater than he had ever imagined. As they walked off the stage together, the excitement in the air was palpable. But it wasn't just the thrill of the performance that lingered, it was the realization of what they had just achieved. It wasn't just music. It was something bigger. It was the future. In the days that followed, Luca and Elon became inseparable in their creative pursuits. They began experimenting, blending sounds, technology, and tradition in ways neither of them had ever thought possible. Luca started to see music through a different lens, not as something to be confined within specific boundaries, but as an ever-evolving form of expression. They worked together on new compositions that incorporated everything from AI-generated sounds to live, interactive performances that blurred the lines between digital and acoustic. These experiments pushed the limits of what an audience could experience, making them part of the creative process. No longer were they passive listeners, they were active participants in the creation of the music. One of their groundbreaking performances took place in a small, intimate venue, an experimental setting where the audience could interact with the music in real time. As Luca played the piano, a massive screen behind him displayed waves of light that shifted and changed with each note he struck. At the same time, Elon's technology created dynamic soundscapes that reacted to Luca's every movement. The result was an immersive experience, a complete sensory overload where the boundaries between music, technology, and art dissolved entirely. For the first time, Luca understood what Elon had meant when he said that creativity had no limits. They had broken through every preconceived notion of what music should be, and in doing so, they had created something entirely new, a space where sound, technology, and human emotion could all coexist, constantly evolving and interacting in ways that were previously unimaginable. This journey of collaboration had also brought Luca closer to himself. No longer was he the solitary figure he once was, locked away in his pursuit of perfection. He had found a way to balance his love for the classical with his newfound passion for pushing creative boundaries. He had realized that, in the end, art, whether it was music, technology, or something else entirely, was about the freedom to explore, to take risks, and to venture into the unknown without fear of failure. One evening, as they sat in a quiet cafe after a particularly successful performance, Luca turned to Elon with a reflective smile. "I never would have imagined I'd be here, in this place, creating music this way. It's strange, but I feel like I'm part of something much bigger than myself now." Elon chuckled, taking a sip of his coffee. "That's the beauty of creativity. It's limitless, just like the possibilities of what we can achieve together. The boundaries are there to be broken." Luca looked out the window, deep in thought. He had finally let go of the old fear, the fear that had once held him back from exploring new ideas, from breaking free of tradition. Now, he saw the world of music as an open canvas, one that he could help paint alongside Elon, in ways that would inspire others to do the same. The future was no longer just an abstract concept, it was a tangible reality. The fusion of technology and music wasn't just a fleeting experiment, it was the future of creativity. And as Luca looked forward, he realized that he was no longer just a pianist or a composer. He was an artist in the truest sense, someone who had dared to break boundaries and had found a new path forward. And so, the journey continued. With every new performance, every new piece of music, and every new collaboration, Luca and Elon pushed the boundaries of creativity further and further. And with each step, they reminded the world that the limits of imagination were only as narrow as the courage to challenge them. The world watched with bated breath as Luca and Elon continued to redefine the landscape of music. Their journey wasn't just about the art of sound, it was about transforming the way people thought about creativity, about technology, and about the very nature of human connection. In every note, every concert, and every experiment, they proved that the boundaries of imagination were as vast as the courage to challenge them. But, as their collaboration grew, so did the questions. What would happen when the world could no longer tell the difference between an organic performance and one shaped by algorithms and AI? Would the purists, the traditionalists, ever accept that technology could coexist with art? Or would they continue to believe that the sanctity of music, of art, lay in the untouched, the unaltered? It was a question that had begun to weigh on Luca as well. The more he worked with Elon, the more he could see the endless possibilities for creativity, yet the more he also understood the resistance that would come. Tradition was not easily shaken. Luca often found himself torn between the legacy of classical music and the allure of this new frontier. On a quiet evening, after a particularly high-profile performance where their music had once again bridged the gap between technology and art, Luca sat down with Elon backstage. The energy from the crowd was still palpable, and the rush of success filled the air, but Luca couldn't shake the feeling of uncertainty that had begun to gnaw at him. "I don't know, Elon," Luca began, his voice quieter than usual. "It's incredible what we've done, but, what about the tradition? What about the purity of the music? Can we really preserve the soul of art while blending it with technology?" Elon looked at him with an understanding gaze. He had anticipated this moment, the one where the pursuit of something new would begin to clash with the weight of history. He leaned back, his fingers steepled in thought before responding. "Luca, I get it," he said softly. "The heart of music, the soul of art, is irreplaceable. But here's the thing, art doesn't just exist in the past. It lives in the present and the future, too. We're not taking away what's sacred. We're expanding it. We're showing people that art can grow. It can evolve. And in doing that, we aren't diminishing its value. We're preserving it by allowing it to stay relevant." Luca absorbed the words, feeling a sense of peace slowly replace the doubts that had been creeping up on him. He thought back to the very beginning of his career, when he had felt the same kind of uncertainty, but in the opposite direction, when he had first heard Beethoven, and it had taken him to a place beyond himself. Maybe the essence of art, of music, wasn't in its purity. Maybe it was in its ability to move, to grow, to change. "I think I understand," Luca said after a long pause. "It's about continuing the legacy, not by keeping it static, but by pushing it forward. If we don't evolve, we're just letting the art die, and I can't let that happen. We can carry the tradition while also shaping the future." Elon smiled, a sense of validation in his expression. "Exactly. We're doing this together, Luca. We're making history." As Luca and Elon's collaboration gained more and more recognition, the public's reaction was mixed. Some hailed them as pioneers, visionaries who were on the brink of a new artistic revolution. Others, however, remained skeptical, fearing that technology would completely overshadow human creativity and emotion. The debate grew louder, but Luca and Elon knew that their work wasn't about convincing everyone. It was about showing what was possible when boundaries were blurred, when the impossible was embraced. Then, one fateful evening, during a live-streamed global performance, the final piece of music they had worked on for months was presented. The performance was a stunning synthesis of both human and machine. A true testament to what their collaboration could achieve. It wasn't just a song, it was an experience, a symphony that enveloped the senses, drawing the audience into a world of sound that was equal parts organic and digital. The performance ended in silence, not of finality, but of profound reflection. The audience was left awestruck, questioning everything they thought they knew about the art form. As the silence stretched on, Luca and Elon stood side by side on stage, their eyes scanning the room. Luca couldn't help but notice how the audience was not just looking at them, but through them, almost as if they were still processing the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. For the first time, Luca truly understood that they had done more than just change music. They had done what every great artist before them had done, they had shifted the perspective of the world. And that was the essence of true creativity. The world wasn't going to change overnight. There would still be those who clung to tradition, and there would always be skeptics. But Luca had come to realize that the future was never meant to be a fixed thing. It was an open question, one that invited everyone to participate in the creation of something new. Standing there in that moment, Luca thought about the journey that had brought him here, the doubts, the fears, the internal struggles. But most of all, he thought about the possibilities. "This isn't the end, is it?" he asked Elon softly. Elon shook his head, his smile more knowing than ever before. "No, Luca. This is just the beginning. Together, we've opened a door. And now, it's up to everyone else to walk through it." The screen above them flickered one final time before it went dark. But in that moment, they knew it wasn't just the performance that had ended, it was the beginning of something bigger than both of them. And so, the story of Luca and Elon continued, not just in music but in every boundary they would break, every limitation they would challenge. Because the boundaries of creativity are limitless when we dare to challenge the norms. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?